Here on Locked On Dolphins. Today on the show, it is Tuesday, July 5th, and we are exploring what offensive record milestones in the history of the Dolphins franchise might be surpassed in 2022.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Dolphins fans? Kyle Krabs, your host here on Locked On Dolphins. Today is Tuesday, July 5th, 2022. I hope you guys enjoyed your 4th for those who partake in the festivities. I know I certainly did. I'm Kyle Krabs, your host here on Locked On Dolphins, lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, director of scouting at the draftnetwork.com, and your host here on Locked On Dolphins. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Dolphins your first Miami Dolphins listen of the day, on days in which we have a podcast, which typically is Monday through Friday, but with the 4th, and I got a little girl that eats the food that I cook now. I was a first-time girl dad last year, and it wasn't too much solids for the 4th of July last year. I had a much bigger interest in what dad was cooking on the grill. So yesterday, I was committed to spending my time firing up and serving as grill master for the Krabs household. We had a good time, and we hope you enjoyed your 4th as well. So today on the show, wanted to, and we usually do this every summer. I did this when I was at USA Today's Dolphins Wire, which is an excellent resource for Dolphins fans who want daily Dolphins content. I am no longer there. I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary of stepping aside from that role to focus more on the podcast and my work over the draftnetwork.com. But we've done this for a couple of years now. Looking at, okay, in the lexicon of like Miami Dolphins team history, what are some of the significant landmarks that we might see surpassed in the upcoming season? And we're going to dedicate 2 shows to this. We're going to look at the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. We're going to look at them separately because I want to make sure we take our time with the offensive side of the ball. Some interesting nuggets here. So we're going to look at passing, rushing, and receiving for Miami Dolphins record books. What players might reach what heights in the team's franchise history? Let's start with passers and Tua Tungavaloa. Tua Tungavaloa will enter this season with 4,467 passing yards. That total by itself is 9th all-time in the history of the Dolphins franchise. It is more than Matt Moore and Chad Pennington, who also exceeded 4,000 passing yards. And then you have the likes of Dolphins legends such as Gus Frerotte and Jay Cutler and Earl Morrall and Joey Harrington and Cleo Lemon and A.J. Feely and Scott Mitchell and Rick Norton and Damien Heward and Steve DeBerg and Jacoby Brissett and Brock Osweiler and Ray Lewis and Dick Wood and Bernie Kosar and Trent Green. You get the point. Right. And when you think about Dolphins quarterbacks, really there's kind of a hierarchy here that includes Dan Marino and Bob Greasy, the 2 Hall of Fame passers. Spoiler alert, Tua is not going to sniff either one of those 2 passing yardage totals. Dan's got 61, 361. And Bob Greasy's got over 25,000. Ryan Tannehill is 3rd in franchise history with over 20,000 passing yards, 20,434. Jay Fiedler is 4th with 11,040. I would say, though, based on our expectations for the Miami Dolphins offense, presuming that Tua Tungavaloa stays healthy, Tua Tungavaloa should exit this list at the end of the year 5th in Dolphins franchise history for career passing yardage as a member of the Miami Dolphins. The names between Jay Fiedler in 4th and Tua Tungavaloa, who is currently 9th, include Chad Henne, 7,114, David Woodley, 5,928, Ryan Fitzpatrick, 5,620, and Don Strock, 4,613. if we're going to project Tua Tagovailoa somewhere between 36 and 3,800 passing yards, presuming he stays healthy for the entirety of the season, that would put him right around 8,000 career passing yards, and that would comfortably park him in front of Chad Henne, fifth in franchise history. Good to know, right? Some historical context. And we all know how long the laundry list of quarterbacks is that have been pegged as the starting quarterback of the Miami Dolphins since Dan Marino retired. And I think that this is a big testament of that Tua was inserted halfway through his rookie season, missed a game, went on IR last year, missed about a month, and yet still entering into year 3 finds himself 9th all-time and in striking distance, realistic striking distance of 5th all-time. If we don't get past Chad Henne, we should definitely get past David Woodley because he isn't even at 6,000. So for Tua, I mean, you're talking 1,500 yards, and you're gonna be in 6th. Now you've got a little bit more ground to cover between you and Chad Henne, and obviously Henne started 31 games for the Dolphins, was 13 and 18 in those contests. So fun fact, Tua could go 0 and 10 in his next 10 starts and finish with the same win-loss record as what Chad Henne had as a starting quarterback of the Miami Dolphins. That won't happen. Relax. And also, quarterbacks are not necessarily solely responsible for wins, but it is good to know. Now, how about touchdowns? Of the quarterbacks on this list, there is a hierarchy here, and it, interestingly enough, has a lot to do with some of the older guys on the list: Dan Marino, Bob Greasy, Don Strock, and I would include Earl Morrall if I'm looking at the top 20 in franchise history. What do those guys all have in common? They have a touchdown pass percentage of 5% or more of their career pass attempts ended up being touchdowns. Tua sits at 4%. The names in front of him: Ryan Fitzpatrick, 4.3%. David Woodley, 3.5%. Chad Henne, 2.9%. Jay Fiedler, 4.1%. Ryan Tannehill, 4.2%. Right? So obviously we'd like to see the touchdown percentage for Tua get a little bit of juice. And if it does, he currently has 27 career touchdowns. If we were to sort this list from most to least, spoiler alert, he's not touching Dan Marino's 420 passing yards or passing touchdowns. He's 10th all time. He's 2 behind Matt Moore. He's 4 behind Chad Henne, and he's 6 behind Ryan Fitzpatrick, 7 behind David Woodley. So if we say Tua Tagovailoa gets 25 touchdowns, right? And that it's not a crazy ambitious forecast, but it is a little ambitious relative to, he's started 21 games and played in a few more than that, and he has 27 at this point in time. So let's say he gets 25 touchdown passes this year. That would put him 52. That would also put him 5th all time behind the same 4 guys: Dan Marino, Bob Greasy, Ryan Tannehill, Jay Fiedler. Seems perfectly reasonable. 3,800 yards and 25 touchdowns for Tua Tungavaloa, comfortably in both passing touchdowns and passing yardage, would put you 5th all time in Dolphins franchise history. Now, there are a couple other metrics that you could look at if you wanted to really dive deep and kind of add more context, and that would include like adjusted yards per attempt, which I'm a big fan of, or passer rating, right? Tua's career passer rating at this point is 88.8, according to Pro Football Reference. Fun fact, and this is somewhat indicative of the era in which some of these other guys played in. There's only one quarterback on this list that is currently in Dolphins career accolades in front of Tua Tagovailoa in both passing yards and passing touchdowns that has a better career passing quarterback rating as a member of the Miami Dolphins. And that is by 0.02 or 0.2, I should say, 89 versus 88.8. And it's Ryan Fitzpatrick, the other quarterback who was just behind center. So from a Dolphins passing perspective, Tua Tungavaloa, we're looking at a pretty reasonable expectation that he is going to be amongst the top 5. He'll be pushing Jay Fiedler in 2 years if he continues to be the quarterback of the Dolphins and he meets those expectations. We'll see. Be a fun ride. Also fun ride. Placing winning bets, which is why you got to take advantage of our friends over at Bet Online, your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports development, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball, NFL futures, all the fights, UFC, boxing, golf, you name it. They got it. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. Up next, we have Dolphins career rushing totals, rushing touchdowns, rushing yardage, attempts. This is a fun list because I'm sure if I asked you to name the top career rushers in Dolphins history, you would name the names, right? Larry Zonka, Mercury Morris, Jim Kick, that trio from the dynasty of the 70s, the dual-headed monster of Ronnie and Ricky in the early to mid-2000s. Lamar Miller has representation on this list as the most modern top 10 career totals for rushing yardage. But if I asked you where the active leader was and what their total was, I don't know if you'd be able to tell me, right? Larry Zonka holds the franchise record with 6,737 career rushing yards, just edging out Ricky Williams, 6,436. Larry Zonka also holds the career touchdowns rushing with 53, just edging out Ricky Williams's 48 career rushing touchdowns. Very cool moment for me to sit here and look at this list, however, and see number 2, Ricky Williams, and Ronnie Brown at number 3. Ronnie Brown, 4,815 rushing yards and 36 touchdowns on the ground. Good for third place in both categories. To know Ricky Williams at the Super Bowl this past year, and then just the other week down at the Senior Bowl Hall of Fame induction, they had a golf tournament charity as well to go along with that. And Ronnie Brown was one of the participants. Of course, he played his college ball at Auburn and got a chance to talk to him. Very cool to sit here and reflect and see both of those names at number 2 and number 3 as guys that I've had a chance to talk to thus far in 2022. But I digress. The current active Miami Dolphins rushing leader for a player that's still on the team is Myles Gaskin. Gaskin ranks 26th all time with 1,329 rushing yards. The good news is, with any level of respectable production, he would jump up big time. If he had 700 yards this year, he'd find himself in 15th or 16th place. But I don't think Myles Gaskin's going to get that kind of crack because they're obviously paying Chase Edmonds what they paid him. They brought in Sony Michel, who they've been rumored to have been interested in for a really long time, and they have Raheem Mostert. So Myles Gaskin is kind of the fourth back on this list. I don't know how much more headway he's going to get, if we're being completely honest. And even Raheem Mostert, who was formerly a Miami Dolphin, doesn't have any credited rushing yards as a member of the Miami Dolphins. So everybody else is starting from scratch. So now you have to ask yourself, okay, what's your expectation? Do we expect any of these backs to go over 1,000 yards? And I would say you're probably going to get between 800 and 900 yards from 2 of these guys. Which ones, I don't know. But if you got 800 or 900 yards, 800 yards from any back who is starting from scratch would put them 36th on all-time history. Currently, David Woodley and Jay Fiedler are 35th and 36th. Fiedler, 834 rushing yards. David Woodley, 771. So you can kind of get sandwiched up. And that also puts you in Bob Greasy territory with 994. He's 31st all time. So Ryan Fitzpatrick, 50th all time with 394. So if anybody has a respectable season, I mean, they're if you go over 1,000 yards, they're going to be in the top 30. Do I expect Myles Gaskin to build on his 1,300-yard head start? No, to be quite frank, I do not. And Gaskin, I don't even know that he's going to catch Kenyon Drake, who's the active NFL player. I guess Lamar Smith is active NFL, or Lamar Miller is active NFL player. I don't believe he's retired. But Jay Ajayi just retired. Lamar Miller. I'm just looking for active names. Ryan Tannehill. These are all players that are in the top 30 and still active NFL players, but obviously are not collecting rushing yards any longer for the Miami Dolphins. As far as quarterbacks go, because I think this is an important note relative to rushing production. Tua Tagovailoa has been credited with 237 career rushing yards at this point in time. That puts him 64th in franchise history. Puts him 7 yards behind Patrick Laird, 12 yards behind Nat Moore. How's that for a 1-2 punch of names in franchise history? But amongst quarterbacks, he currently ranks 1, 2. I'm not a math guy. Excuse me. 3, 4, 5, 6th all time in Dolphins quarterbacks in rushing yards. The quarterback immediately in front of him is Ryan Fitzpatrick with 394. Then you have David Woodley at 771. Jay Fiedler at 834. Bob Greasy with 994. And Ryan Tannehill, the only Dolphins quarterback in franchise history with over 1,000 rushing yards with 1,210 career rushing yards. So Tua Tungavaloa, in the same spirit of everything else that we've covered, obviously the running backs are starting from scratch. Tua Tagovailoa could certainly pass Ryan Fitzpatrick and get into the top 5 all time for rushing yards. But I think the more interesting and compelling race for Tua as it pertains to rushing statistics is touchdowns. He has 6 career rushing touchdowns. That is 5 off the franchise record for quarterbacks. That held by Jay Fiedler with 11. David Woodley, Dan Marino, 9 apiece. Bob Greasy, 7. Ryan Tannehill, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Tua Tungavaloa, all tied with 6. So, if Tua were to happen to get 5 rushing touchdowns this year, and I think that's probably an ambitious forecast, right? But if he happened to get 5, he would be tied as the franchise record holder in quarterback rushing touchdowns. The more you know. As we transition to receiving here, I think this is obviously where things get very interesting because you have Mike Gesicki in his standing as a tight end. You have Jaylen Waddle with an immediate head start. You're not really going to have the Devontae Parker chase. Devontae Parker finished 6th all time in Dolphins receiving yards, behind only Duper and Clayton, Nat Moore, Chris Chambers, and O.J. McDuffie. Parker left the Dolphins some 350 yards short of passing O.J. McDuffie for 5th all time in receiving yards. But before we get there, before we go down this rabbit hole, got to remind you guys about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one betting location. But they're not our only friend here on the show. RockAuto.com, also a friend of the show. RockAuto.com is a family business who's been providing auto parts customers with high-quality service online for the last 20 years. So whether you're shopping for engine control modules, brake parts, taillights, motor oil, or even new carpet for your classic or your daily driver, RockAuto.com has everything you need in one easy-to-navigate catalog. And in just a few clicks, you can get everything delivered directly to your front door. Best of all, Price is the same at rockauto.com for both professionals and do-it-yourselfers. So why would you shop anywhere else and spend up to twice as much for the same parts? So visit rockauto.com for all your auto parts needs and write Locked On under How Do You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. So the question now begs to be asked, where is the receiving leader amongst active members of the Miami Dolphins? Devontae Parker, an active NFL player, 6th all-time in receiving yards with 4,727. What is fun is seeing some of the names on this list and how high they got. Brian Hartline, 8th all-time, 4,243. Jarvis Landry, 4,038. Devon Bess, 11th all-time. Jarvis Landry was 9th. Brian Hartline was 8th. Oronde Gadsden, 13th, just behind Paul Warfield, and just in front of Irving Fryer and Tony Martin and Randy McMichael. Howard Twilley also in the 3,000 career receiving yards club, which brings you right onto the cusp of the active current member of the Miami Dolphins who can catapult himself presumably the highest, that being tight end Mike Gesicki. Gesicki has 2,255 career receiving yards. That currently ranks him 21st all-time in franchise history and 200 yards behind the 20th ranking individual, which also happens to be a tight end, Bruce Hardy, who played for the team from 78 to 89. 256 catches for Bruce Hardy, 2,455 receiving yards, 25 touchdowns. We've kind of on this podcast already kind of gone over the tempered expectations that we have for Mike, right? In talking about, yes, he had the volume last year, over 100 targets, but we're not really sure based on the added emphasis in the running game and mixing and matching personnel and being able to block and having guys like Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill who probably run some of the same routes with a little bit more effectiveness than what Mike does. Another 800-yard season from Mike Gesicki. But if he got it, he would become the 18th member of the Miami Dolphins 3,000 career receiving yards club, joining all of those names that I mentioned and passing in the process, currently 21st. He'd pass Bruce Hardy, he would pass Kenny Stills, and he would pass Marty Booker along the way. Amongst tight ends, however, there is only one name other than Bruce Hardy, and he's already been mentioned, Randy McMichael. Randy McMichael finished his Dolphins career from 02 to 06 with 283 receptions, 3,096 receiving yards, and 18 career touchdowns. Mike enters the year with 199, 2255, and 13. The magic question is, can Mike Gesicki eventually hunt down Randy McMichael? The gap of 84 receptions feels too big for 1 year. The gap of 850 receiving yards feels a little too big for 1 year. And even touchdowns. Bruce Hardy, his 25, puts him in first place. You would not expect to see the tight end touchdown records shake out the way that they are. Because it's Bruce Hardy at 25, Anthony Fasano at 24, Jim Mandich, the Mad Dog, with 23, and then Randy McMichael with 18, Keith Jackson also with 18, Charles Clay with 14, Joe Rose and Mike Gesicki tied with 13. So Mike's going to have his work cut out for him. But if he were to happen to have an 85 reception, 850 receiving yard season, he would take first place in both of those categories. temper your expectations, I think he'd probably need another contract in order to get there, because he is, of course, under the franchise tag, and we don't really know what the team's long-term plan is for him. But then you have the wide receivers. And obviously, Tyreek Hill is starting from scratch. Jaylen Waddle had a phenomenal first season. His 1,015 receiving yards puts him 51st all-time in franchise history, and 2 spots in front of Grant, who needed 6 years to get over 1,000 receiving yards, 1,001 to be exact. So Waddle, 13 more receptions, 14 more yards, and 1 more receiving touchdown than Jakeem Grant had that across that entire stretch. I only mention that because it's a fun name that also was up over 1,000 yards, who's been with the Dolphins for a really long time, have to be a speed receiver. And Jaylen Waddle blew his numbers out of the water. It's not going to take Jaylen Waddle long to pass his wide receivers coach. Wes Welker went on to have a very productive NFL career, but he had 1,121 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown as a member of the Miami Dolphins. Waddle's already got more receptions. He needs 107 yards to pass Wes Welker in that statistic. But when last month we covered the fantasy forecast from ESPN and Yahoo and talked about whether or not we take the over the under, kind of the theme that existed with both Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle is I wouldn't expect either one of these guys to go off for 1,500 yards, right? I think the expectation is probably 1,100 to 1,200 yards for both these guys. Let's say Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle are both on the low end of that, and they both go off for 1,100 yards and 85 receptions. 1,100 yards for Jaylen Waddle would at 21-15. And 21-15 would put him 26th all-time in franchise history, behind Jim Jensen, 25th, Jim Kick, 22-10, Anthony Fasano, 22-11, Brandon Marshall, 22-28, and then that is where we reach Mike Gesicki's current number of 22-55. Things would have to take a very bizarre turn for Jaylen Waddle to finish the year with more receiving yards than Mike Gesicki, but it is mathematically possible. So some fun names on this list that Jaylen would pass, but a lot of them are tight ends and backs to the wide receivers. You know, it's 2 seasons of this production that he just had is what is going to put him into that 3,000-yard receiving club, which is that exclusive club that currently only has 17 members in franchise history. You could take everything that was just said and subtract 1,100 yards off of it for Tyreek Hill, and that's going to be, from a career mark perspective, a blank slate that's going to be fascinating to see how quickly he can roll things up and get on the board. But from a receptions record, I do think it's worth acknowledging the franchise record holder did not shout out Mark Duper for having the yardage record. He had 8,869 receiving yards. Mark Clayton holds the receptions and touchdowns record with 550 and 81 respectively. This is where things get fun because remember, Jaylen Waddle set the franchise record, set the NFL record for receptions by a rookie in his first season with 104. That puts him 50th all-time already in franchise history. And if he does indeed go off for, say, 85 receptions, which would be kind of where I would ballpark the number, and that puts him at 189, he would be tied for 23rd all-time with Anthony Fasano. And if he happened to get 95, he would find himself exactly where Mike Gesicki is to start the season with 199. So Jaylen Waddle very quickly can find himself in the top 25 in a number of receiving categories. Mike Gesicki is kind of at the top of the quickly comes and goes echelon and would need a strong season and then another contract in order to push up into the hierarchy of the top 15, top 10 in the significant receiving categories for the Miami Dolphins. But it would not take much beyond what he presumably is going to get this year to find himself amongst the number 1 or number 8 ends in Dolphins franchise history. So that's the offensive side of the ball. Some of the key statistical landmarks to be mindful of in the echelons of Dolphins history. We're going to do the defensive side of the ball tomorrow. We're going to look at sacks. We're going to look at turnovers. We're going to look at tackles. And obviously that is much more of a blank slate because everybody on the defense gets tackles. Everybody can get sacks. Everybody can get interceptions. Obviously, everybody knows about the X-Man. Happy birthday to Xavier Howard, by the way. His birthday was on Monday, July 4th. And we'll be talking about him plenty tomorrow on the show. Kyle Krabs, Fins Up. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. Your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Thanks for checking out the show. Make it a great Tuesday.